today we're going to be talking a little bit about the loan repayment plan, and we have a few people on the phone, which I'll have introduce themselves in just a minute. But I think we're going to try and have this session recorded so that we can have this available for people. So this will be recorded. If you have questions, and you can add them into the chat, we will be addressing questions as we go and then also at the end. So the goal today, there we go. The goal today is for us to talk about the loan repayment plan, give you some advice on putting together an application, and identifying some of the tools that are available here on campus to get the application together. So before we get too far into the loan repayment plan, I wanted to introduce the panelists that we have today. And so let's start, I'll let them introduce themselves. Let's start with Dr. Bilomek.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Bilomek. I'm a PhD psychologist in the Department of Family Medicine. I do health disparities and health services research, and I received an LRP, I think 2009 through 13 or so, in high school, during high school.
Dr. Liu.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Liu. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist in the Department of Pediatrics. I do research related to exercise and asthma and obesity in children, and I received my LRP starting 2016, I think, and I'm still getting it now.
Great. And then Dr. Ulloa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Uyo. I'm a pediatric infectious diseases physician scientist. Rather new to UCI and CHOC. I'm in the Department of Pediatrics as well as the Department of Medicine and Microbiology, Molecular Genetics. My lab primarily focuses on treatment for drug-resistant pathogens, but in the era of COVID, we're also doing a lot of COVID research. I received my LRP in 2017, and then I applied for a renewal, and I'm currently in have a renewal on the LRP. Nice to meet everyone.
And then Brooke, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brooke Piercy. I work with Diana Stevens in the Institute for Clinical and Translational Science. I'm the research program manager, and I'll be helping to moderate this workshop today.
And then I'm Diana Stevens. I'm the education director for the Institute of Clinical and Translational Science. And then for the loan repayment plans, I'm also the institutional business officer, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in the presentation. So just to get started, the loan repayment plan is an award set up by the NIH. These awards are committed for individuals who are providing 2 years of research. The NIH will provide up to $50,000 in debt relief. And the goal of this program is to really allow people to be more involved in research and have the opportunity to spend their time doing research.
And Diana, just real quick, and maybe we're going to do this later, but I think Julie had suggested if the participants could just type into the chat their name, department, and maybe just like a phrase that indicates what their area of research is, just so we can start seeing those sort of flow through the chat, and then we as panelists can be thinking about how we might make suggestions. So can everyone just type their name, department, and just a short phrase indicating what their research area is?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I forgot. But yes, that'll really help us as we address kind of the questions moving forward. And part of the reason that knowing your department and a little bit about your research is helpful is that the LRP is broken into 5 categories. And so as you submit your applications, you select a category to apply to. So the first category is the clinical research category, and this is available through all of the NIH's institutes. This research is research that's focused on human subjects or materials. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a clinical research project. It can be basic research. The other is pediatric research. Also, it can be human-based research or basic research, and all of the institutes receive these types of LRPs. The health disparities research is, again, basic clinical, social, and behavioral research, and it's focused on minorities and health disparity population research. And all of the institutes accept these applications. The contraceptive Contraception and infertility research is a little bit smaller. It's only accepted by the National Institute of Child's Health Development, I believe that is, the NICHD. And these are all research projects that are focused on the conditions impacting the ability to conceive or bear children and providing methods of preventing pregnancy. And the last is the clinical research with an emphasis from a disadvantaged background. So these are the similar research projects that are under the clinical research arm, but it's specifically for individuals from a disadvantaged background, and they're only accepted through the NIMHD. And so just a little bit about the institutes. For those of you who aren't very aware of the NIH is broken up into, I believe it's 25 different institutes. Each of these institutes have a budget and a mission statement. And from those institutes, these are the ones that award these grants. So as you put this grant together, this award together, it will go to an institute to be reviewed and awarded. And so through the LRP website, there's information about the types of funding that is available through each institute and the rate in which they are awarding these awards. So it's really important that as you sit down and look at what your research is, you examine the missions of the institutes that best align with your work to select the best home for your application. The website has a lot of information about success rates, the amount of the awards that tend to be provided, the amount of applications. And so it's really important to kind of look into the institutes and make sure that you find the right home. And so I think this is a good time for us to stop for a minute and let our panelists discuss kind of how they identified where to submit their applications and what that means in terms of how their application was reviewed. Do we want to start maybe with John?
Yeah, so I basically, it was kind of in my first job, actually during my postdoc, right out of the PhD. I had a colleague at another institution. By the way, there was no centralized effort to communicate about this. I think LRP has been a better kept secret than it should be. In a number of institutions. I had a friend at University of Utah that suggested I look into it. In my postdoc, I was on a study, an NIDDK funded diabetes disparities intervention study. And as I was preparing an application for a K award, I was able to package a lot of the things that I included in my K application for the LRP. My K was not funded, but the LRP was accepted. So I ended up, it was technically through the health disparities mechanism, and that was through National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparity, or at the time.
Kim?
So I am funded through NHLBI, so it's the Lung Blood Institute, and I've actually applied a couple times and did not get it. And so one of my biggest pieces of advice is just keep trying. I went to one of the most expensive medical schools in the country, and so I came out with a lot of debt. And this was something that I was not willing to give up, you know. So, and one of the first years I applied, I didn't apply to NHLBI. And I think when I talked to the program officer for feedback, they recommended, they had said that their pool of money was much smaller than some of the other institutes. And so I had better success with NHLBI. So within each institute, you can actually look at because I could have done pediatric research or clinical research, you can look at, the number of applicants and the success rate. And so pediatric research through NHLBI ended up being working for me.
And just to follow up what Kim said on the dashboard that's available in the link that's on this slide, the information that's in the square boxes is the number of applications and the success rate. But there's also a drop down that allows you to filter that through on the type of LRP that you're applying to. So you can really whittle down into what types of funding are available and what kinds of projects they're really focused on. Julie, do you have any information you'd like to give?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So just a few points. I think it's really important. So I am a pediatric, as I mentioned, pediatric infectious diseases physician scientist. And so I ended up applying through and received the award through the NICHD, which is the National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development. the reasons why I applied for that one, so you rank basically the institutes. And so I ranked NICHD as number 1, and then number 2 was NIAID. And both of those make sense for me given my research. I already had a grant that I had secured in my last year of residency, actually, to start during my second year of fellowship, and that was through the NICHD. So they had already invested in me, and so that was a K-12. So that was one reason why I listed the number 1. And then also, I think this award is really important because they're investing in you and your career and your potential as an individual in academic medicine. And that has many components. And the other component is also your mentorship currently, because that portends like good outcomes in terms of being very successful in the long run. And so my mentor, Victor Nazay at UC San Diego, had various grants, R01s and otherwise, through both of those institutes, so the NICHD as well as the NIAID. So I think it's also important to work very closely with your mentor, depending on which stage you are and where you're at. You know, some of you may be independent, some of you may still have some mentorship. And for those that do have mentors, maybe kind of align the institutes with the institutes that fund your mentor's research.
And that's a great point. So one of the things that we really encourage is really researching these institutes. And we'll talk about the resources that are available, but the ICTS is available to sit with you and your mentor and discuss how to identify the right institute, because as Dr. Liu had mentioned, applying to the wrong institute could increase the chances that you won't be funded, especially if either your research doesn't align properly or if they just don't have enough funding available to make you as competitive as possible. So then what are some of the criteria for the LRP? So the LRP requires that you have an MD or PhD or an equivalent terminal degree. There is some exceptions for the contraception and infertility research. So if you're planning on applying to that, just let us know. I think they have some exceptions for master's students. You have to have secured some research funding. And this is something that's a little less formal. You don't need an NIH grant or a grant from NSF, but if your university is supporting you in some way so that you can accomplish your research, that's enough too. But you do need to show that there is some research support dollars. You also have to have educational loan debt that's 20% of your annual income, be able to provide 20 hours a week in research, and be a US citizen or a permanent resident. So then the applications for the LRPs have a pretty short window. The application is open now and it runs until November 15th. The website gives a lot of information about how that process goes after that. But this is the window that they do annually. So if you don't make this window for 2020, 2021 will likely have the same window as well. And then the application components. So the next couple of slides are going to have a lot of information, and then we'll slow down and talk about them in a little more detail. But for those of you who have looked at some sort of career development award, they have similar pieces as Dr. Billamek was talking about. There is some information that's asking about your research activities. They do want to know a little bit about a career development plan and a training and mentorship plan. There are some other additional requirements. As you fill out your application online, you have to submit personal information, employment information, your education and training, information about your college. There's also information about your primary mentor. All of your applications are loaded onto the LRP website directly. So you will be submitting on your own. This kind of application doesn't go through our sponsored projects office. So you independently submit them. You do need an ERA Commons login. So if you don't already have that, I can help you get one. But I do caution you that you should try and get these applications in early. Your reference letters are all submitted by your referees. So they go onto the website and submit on their own, and you get notification that they've been submitted. And as an institutional business official receives your packet once it's been complete. So for UCI, it would be myself. And then I have to go through and verify all of your employment and salary information. And all of that must be done by November 15th, or your application doesn't make it in time. So I do suggest that you try and submit it earlier than the 15th to make sure that you get all the pieces together. But now a little detail of what those pieces look like is the research activity. You need to be certain to describe your research plan, specifically what your roles and responsibilities are going to be in them and how you're going to time these out. It's really important to include some sort of timeline that shows how this is going to work for the next 2 years. It's also important to have a training and mentorship plan. The ICTS can help you put one of these together, but it's important to identify mentors who can help you move on to your next research step. So part of this plan should not just include mentorship on your research program, but also on how you're going to be mentored into becoming an independent investigator. I think we have one more slide before I turn it over. So there's also information about your mentorship team, or if you're applying more as an independent investigator, what kind of activities you're doing to move on to the next phase of your career. So really quickly, I wanted to bring in Dr. Bilemek. Do you have any advice on putting together this application?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, again, and there's, unfortunately, there's no summary statement or study section review that gives you any feedback. So a lot of this is just sort of feeling our way through, but I did get just, the advice I had heard and was basically, as much as your activities can be connected to something that is ongoing, some kind of funded work that's ongoing, that's important, like that idea that you need to be spending 50% time on the research project. It has to be meaningful, but I think that the training and mentorship plan was an important thing because, like Julie was saying, it's the whole idea is they want to see that this is going to propel you into a successful career in academic medicine or in health-related research at least. Yeah, so I think it was like I was kind of reviewing back because it's been a few years that I had really connected things to the activities of like the ongoing R01 that I was sort of hired under for my postdoc, but then like really described specific things that I'd be doing to establish some early independence in my own research trajectory, and then specific kind of mentorship activities, involving kind of workshops I was going to do at some professional meetings and, frequency of meetings with my mentors and sort of involving a second mentor that was more of an expert in community engaged work, really spelling those things out, that there's kind of a clear path towards at least the early stages of independence of research.
Dr. Liu, any advice?
I have a couple things. One is it took me a long time to get my loan information because they were requesting all these original documents, which like in med school was all over the place. So that is something that if you're really thinking about this, I would start now, because some of the banks and loan programs, they don't get back to you right away. So that is number one. Number two is this is very similar to the K. So, it's important what your research plan is and activity. It needs to be well thought out, but they really are making the investment on you. So, and it's a little bit harder from my experience and from some of my other colleagues to get it as a fellow. I mean, fellows do get it, but they need to really prove that beyond, their time during fellowship doing research, they're going to continue in that field. But that part of your training is just as important as your research plan. So just like the K, you have to spend, kind of equal effort into that. And there wasn't necessarily a template to use, but if you have already applied for other grants, I mean, you got to take what you have and recycle and what has worked for you in the past to put it together.
And before we turn over to Dr. Aloa, I want to let everyone know too, I see a couple people who have been part of the ICTS K Club or are submitting diversity supplements, and so we've worked with you on those. And so it's important to know that this doesn't have to be a brand new research project. This can be very much linked to the work that you're doing, and you should utilize pieces of grants that you're already working on. And if you haven't been part of some of those workshops that we've put together to help put those grants, I'm happy to connect you with those resources as well. So Dr. Aloa, any advice on getting your application together?
Yeah, just kind of reiterating what you said, that you're not going to get dinged for submitting an LRP with the same specific aims that you submitted for another grant. That's not, you're not being funded necessarily. They're investing more in you, not necessarily that specific project. That all being said, I think, I think your project really needs to align, similar to what Dr. Liu mentioned, with the goals of the institute that you're applying for. So even if it means that you specifically state, like, my specific aims, like, address, like, the mission X, Y, and Z of this institute, right? They align with the National Action Plan to X, Y, Z. So I think it's really good if you make some of those bold statements. I would start on the application early, especially for anyone in the audience that doesn't have extensive experience writing a lot of grants. It can be a little bit of a beast of an application. And just coordinating everyone, right? You need to coordinate your letter writers, get all those letter writers and all those, and they should be strong. So try to, even if you're like, hey, I can prepare a draft for you, and then have them work on a working draft of a letter of recommendation, but they should be strong. This is a very competitive program, so you want to make sure that your letters are solid. In terms of the mentor letter, again, similar to the K, this needs to be, my mentor letter was probably like 6 to 8 pages. It went through in a lot of detail about, the mentor's history of providing mentorship to other scholars and where they've ended up, and many of them in, industry or tenure track faculty positions, et cetera. And so really breaking that mentor letter down into different sections. If anyone's interested, I can pull one up in a second and kind of go through those sections. But just going into, the mentorship, I think, is really important for this application, and just making sure that you have a very strong letter from your mentor as well. Yeah, I think those are the main points. And then certainly the grant needs to be well written, but you don't have a lot of space, or I think you might, in terms of page numbers, in order to elaborate extensively, but just try to do the best that you can. Oh, and one last thing, if you have a sample application from a prior successful applicant that's in your field, I think it'd be worth just taking a look at that to get a sense of the structure. And just, it's nice to have a sample application to take a look at if you have access to one.
And so following up what Dr. Loa said, beyond the research piece of your grant, there are a lot of other pieces that come into it. So you'll have a space to talk about your environment that you're working in. And in this, really talk about what's being provided to you to make sure that you can be successful. Office space, lab space, what's available in terms of laboratories or services. In your personal statement, make sure that you really talk yourself up. And I know that's hard for some people to put together as they write these applications, but the reviewers will only get as much information as you provide them. And if you won't talk yourself up, then they may not feel as enthusiastic about funding you to move forward. And there's a lot of information about the primary mentor. And so this is what Dr. Lowe was talking about. This is a large piece of your grant, and it's really important that your primary mentor provides a lot of statements about what their experience has been in mentorship, because what the review group is looking at is how likely are you to succeed? And if you don't have a mentor that has a track record of pushing people through into success, it'll be a harder sell for you. So make sure that you have a lot of discussion in your mentor's statement. And one of the things that we don't have on the slide, but that Dr. Aloa mentioned, and so I think I'd like to take a second to talk about too, is how important all of the other pieces are that are part of this grant. There are letters of recommendations, and everything that you write in these letters are important for the reviewers to be able to give you information to decide to fund you or not. And so maybe Dr. Billamek, do you have how is getting letters for your application? How did that process work? Did you have any issues with that?
Yeah, no issues, but I think I did write. I don't. It seemed like, I'm kind of looking back, and it seemed like I had like 5 letters. I was sort of surprised to see there was that many letters. Kim, the other two should say if this was still the case. I feel like I'm looking at drafts that I wrote 5 letters for myself, and I would write. Some of them wear a fake mustache when I wrote one. I don't know, so that was tough. But I definitely got the letters that I needed, and I did have conversations because those exact things about really speaking to the letter writer's experience as a mentor, I think that was emphasized to me as well. And so I really made sure to speak to that and to speak to like the mentor's commitment for the frequency of interactions with you. You know, so actually saying that we have a standing weekly meeting, or we will begin having a monthly conversation, whatever it is, spelling those two things out are very important. The letter isn't just like, man, Bill, boy, he's the best, huh? Like that letter isn't that helpful compared to, I mean, you want to speak to your abilities, but it's very much about their stated commitment, I think. And there was a question in the chat about deciding between the mentored versus the independent research role, and I'll comment briefly on it. I just think it really just depends. You know, if you're working in the lab with a where you have a senior investigator that is in a mentorship role with you, that's probably, you know, the one you consider. If you have kind of a track record of independent research, like you've had an R01 or something, I think I would think a lot more about the independent route. But again, I'd be interested to hear what the others think.
Dr. Liu, any advice on letters?
I wrote all the letters as well. I think that's just the expectation. And you have 3 to 5 letters, I think, that you can submit. And so if you have 3 people that you know have a track record with that institute, and the letters are going to sound fine, I think 3 is fine. But if you are able to get more and they're going to be strong letters, I think that's good as well. The other thing I was going to say is I've always been taught, you know, for the mentoring and training plan, is that the team of mentorship, not necessarily one person, is also very, very valuable. And so some of the gaps that I had, you know, in terms of like, I don't know, mentorship in certain parts of my research, we got people from outside of the institute. So I have someone in Arizona, and then I have someone in San Diego who's part of my mentorship team. And when you have that, you also have to really spell out how often you're going to meet with them and how feasible it is, because sometimes, you know, that will come back. The other thing that's really helpful for all parts of your application is if there's figures and tables. And so I think I ended up putting a table for my mentor with like specifically the names of everybody, what level they're at, you know, like how many years of mentorship, just things that are, because there's a lot of words, the application's really dense. So if you can break it up in other ways, and this is just grantsmanship, right? So the easier way to look at things, it'll make the reviewers happier.
And then really quickly, Kim, too, for your renewal application, what was one of the big changes in a renewal?
So for the renewal, I did not change my much of the other main components. So like the research project, like I tweaked it a little bit. The main thing is that 2-pager on your research accomplishments, that's the most important thing. So I basically laid it out kind of like a CV, where I had like the grants I had received, and it's in the period of time where you got your initial application or your renewal period. The papers I written during that time period, the projects, it just was really easy to read. For some reason, last year, I don't know if I did it wrong, or they ended up only giving me 1 year of renewal instead of 2. And when I called the program officer, she had no idea where that came from. So just be careful with that, because 1 year versus 2 can make a big difference. And so you don't have to like constantly apply, but that 2-page research accomplishment is super important. But you do have a much better chance of a renewal. I can't remember the numbers, but once you get funded, I mean, not everyone gets funded, but the renewal percentage is much higher.
Kim, I just want to echo, yeah, the same thing happened with me. I think my first renewal was 2 years, and then I forget, it keeps like, you keep cutting it in half and whatever, like you know, so I might've done 2 additional 1-year renewals after that. And yeah, I didn't know until I got the new contract and said like, yeah, it's just going to be a year now. And I said, okay.
Go ahead,
That's a,
Dr.
Oh, just to comment on the renewal application. So my initial application and my renewal application were completely different in terms of the specific aims. So I had submitted my initial NIH LRP thinking that this project was going to work. It did not work, but you have to submit, I believe, quarterly updates. And so in one of those updates, I had completely changed my specific aims. And so that change that I did at some point during my LRP, those specific aims aligned with my renewal specific aims. Although I will say with my renewal application, my specific aims were maybe a little bit more detailed. I think, and I got it, the renewal. I think what they really care about is just your productivity. Like, what have you done during that time? And have you shown progress towards what independence moving forward, you know, publishing, signs that you're going to be continuing to produce and contribute to the academic community. And so I continue to have publications, and I think, and strong letters of recommendation and strong support. So your mentor is going to be evaluating your performance as well as you move along through your LRP award period. So I think that's really important. It's more kind of your productivity and what have you done during that time. And again, not necessarily the specific aims, which again, mine changed completely. For those of you, I forgot to mention this. So I had a very unique arrangement in terms of my mentor. So I was associated with a hospital in Philadelphia, but my mentor was actually at UC San Diego, and I was funded in my first time for my LRP. But again, I encourage you, for those who are not funded the first time, to reapply, because I have a lot of colleagues and friends that have gotten it on their second or third application process. So if anyone has any unique situation where they are affiliated with one institution and have a mentor like on a completely different coast, and you want to talk about that, I'm happy to discuss that in more detail. I only had one mentor that was at UC San Diego, even though my primary institution was in Philadelphia. During the research period, I actually physically moved to California. And so I just had to be very clear in explaining that in my application. And so I think so long as you suggest to do something really odd, as long as you're able to clearly outline what it is that you're doing, and that your letter writers and your mentor kind of echo what it is that you're doing and echo a support of what you're doing, then I think it's also okay. In terms of my letter writers, I selected letter writers from not from my home institution. So I had a letter from my department chair at my home institution, and then I had letters from where I did med school, where I did residency, and also my mentor. And I think what that shows is that you still are obtaining mentorship from these people that have been in your life at some point, right? And so I think that that's something also important, because that's something that you're going to need, is continued mentorship and long-lasting relationships in academic medicine. And then ultimately, since research is very collaborative, also working with people from different institutions, et cetera. So I don't know if that helped me, but that's what I did. And I had letters from people from different institutions, and I have this really unique mentorship collaborative East Coast, West Coast thing. So if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer those questions offline.
And I think one of the important things that Dr. Aloa mentioned was the consistency through the application and the letters. So making sure that as you pull these pieces together, whatever your unique situation is, that you really echo it throughout the application and have the support of your mentorship team, so that the application is really cohesive. So just to kind of quickly step back a little bit and talk about the application process, one of the big steps that you should probably be starting now, if you haven't already, is discussing with your mentor what your research projects will be, selecting where you're going to apply, and then contacting your program officer. So for each of these institutes and these grants, you have a program officer that's assigned to these. And by reaching out to them early and giving them information about maybe your specific aims, setting up a short time to discuss your application with the program officer, it'll really help you navigate through the process. These grants will be reviewed, but you do not receive feedback for these grants. So as Kim mentioned, she was able to reach out to her program officer to get some clarification. So it's important to kind of make sure that you build those relationships early. And then also please contact me So one of the steps that needs to happen in your application is that your institution is not going to submit the grant for you, which is the typical fashion that grants get submitted. They would go through our Kowali Research and our Sponsored Projects Office, and so the Sponsored Projects Office signs off on it. For these LRPs, this is an award that goes directly to you, and if you are awarded, the NIH actually pays your loan directly to the bank. So since no funding comes to the university is not part of this. So what they do instead is they have an institutional business officer that then reaches out and verifies the information that's put into your application in terms of your job and your salary information. So by reaching out to me, I'll be able to start that process early so that I'm not holding up your application. Also, as Dr. Liu mentioned, contact your lenders early. There is a whole list on the LRP website that tells, that really defines the type of documentation you need to provide about your loans. And it's a lot of information and it's very detailed. So be sure to get that together early so that you're able to provide that. And then the second is make sure you have contacted your references. On the LRP website, it also very clearly states how they submit their letters. They submit their letters on your behalf. So you won't be adding it into one PDF and uploading it. They need to go into the system, create their own login and upload it themselves. So there is some additional planning that needs to happen to make sure that those get submitted. And then the ICTS is available to review drafts as well. We have some faculty. Our panelists are also available to review draft language, but if you reach out to Brooke or myself, we can find some faculty to kind of create a little ad hoc committee to review documentation as you get it together. We're working on getting a grants library together that has samples of an LRP. I believe we may have one currently. And we're working on really building that up so that there are successful grants that you can look at to get a better idea of how to structure these. So just some of the basic review criteria. So these are the criteria that they list on their website. Since they don't provide feedback on these grants, it's a little less clear what their true discussions happen when they do the review. But really, it's each of the institutes are making the decision on whether or not to fund these grants. And they're really prioritizing that the research that you plan to do fits nicely with the mission. So as you select your institute, it's really important to look at what's the mission of their institute and how do you line up with that. And then, let's see. The other pieces are how appropriate are you to be moving forward as a researcher? So the other piece is you individually, do you have past experience that gives you the ability to become an independent researcher? Do you have the right mentorship? Are you in the right, do you have the right commitment to research? And a lot of that comes from the strength of the letters of recommendation that are put together. And they'll also be examining the quality of the environment. So it's really important that the environment that you put together on your application shows the resources you have available to do your research. So before we move on to the next piece, is there any insight you'd like to give about the review piece, Dr. Bilemek?
Nothing specific. I think that summed up very closely to the things I was thinking about as I tried to write mine.
Dr. Liu?
The only thing I know that the applications are reviewed by 2 different reviewers. There's no like study section or any of those things. And so they have the criteria that they have to go by, and they can communicate with each other. But it's less of the, regular process through NIH.
And then Dr. Aloa, any insights on the review process?
I don't think I have anything additional to add. I would just work closely, especially if you have a mentor that has had successful applicants in the past, work closely with them. And then we're also happy to, us here, the panelists and Diana, and Brooke, we're all happy to help.
So then in terms, oh, sorry, I didn't So in terms of some of the resources that are available on campus, so we have a grants library where I believe we have 1 or 2 successful RPs that we can give you access to. The ICTS has a program that's called the Affiliated Scholars Advancement Program. So this is a program that's available to anyone, and it has some different training opportunities. There's training in responsible conduct of research, which is required for some of the different NIH grants that are available. The ICTS and the Statistical Consulting Center offers 1 hour free statistical support. So that's something that's available. And then the ICTS also has a K grant writing program. And the UCI School of Medicine has an RO1 bootcamp. So these are some of the tools that you can use to kind of start developing either a separate research plan or to be part of your timeline that moves you into an independent investigator. So the last slide I have is just some tips that are really important as you put these applications together. One is really contact your program officer. Program officers are your advocate for putting these grants together and any grant in the future. So really discussing your plans with them is the best way to make sure that you found the right home for your research, and they can give you the best advice on how to navigate that specific institute. Strong letter writers can really make or break your application. It'll be, no matter how wonderfully you put everything together, if you have lukewarm support from your mentors or your referees, it really doesn't speak well for your application. And really have a well-defined commitment to research. So as you make your career development timeline, show that you are interested in staying involved in research, because that's the goal of this program, is to really make sure that the researchers are being fed into a research pipeline. And don't rush your application. If you put something in that has spelling mistakes or general minor errors, it's something that the reviewers will pick up really easily. Any other tips, Dr. Bilemek, that you want to give before we close up?
Well, I definitely want to make sure we have time for questions too, but I just think, I mean, just the 2 things are like, just especially if you're a junior researcher, like you just have to do this. Like just do it. Like I can't even tell you how transformative it was, because yeah, I mean, I left a PhD program with a lot more debt than most PhDs did because of terrible planning and weird gaps in funding and stuff. So it was completely transformational to my career, and it just gave me, I was always kind of feeling pressure, like, do I go to industry? Am I going to be able to kind of pursue this dream job I always had of working in a university? So like, you really have to do it. But the second thing is, whatever you write for this application, you'll use it like in your merit and promotions materials. Again, if you apply for a K, if you apply for an RO1 or not. So a lot of the stuff you're writing kind of became like sort of the foundation that I used for other things when I applied for my faculty job coming out of my postdoc, all those things. So it's just an inherently valuable thing, because like we should always be kind of visualizing what's next for us and how do we want to be developing. So just that process alone, even if you don't get funded, is pretty valuable. And that's why you should like get off this call and just contact your, just start today on this, because it does take a little bit of time, not just the total hours you need to be writing. That's not overwhelming, but there's some lag time between asking for letters and things. So like, just start today, because it's just going to be helpful no matter what. And if you're not funded this first time, like there's a really strong chance that you can improve your application and get funded later.
Dr. Liu?
I don't have a lot to add, but yeah, this is something you should not miss this opportunity. Just keep applying. And I wrote that specifically in my personal statement, like this award will allow me to really, pursue a career in academics without the financial pressures. And so that's helpful. I think that's it.
Dr. Aloa, any other tips?
Yeah, just echoing what Dr. Bilemek said, is that this is a wonderful, wonderful program. It has relieved a lot of financial debt. It's a very generous program, and you do recycle so many components, including the letters of recommendations that just get edited and slightly changed for other grants. And this is how academic or research kind of works too. You get one grant, including an LRP, is a wonderful thing. Not only is it helpful to you, but it's a wonderful thing to have on your CV. and already demonstrates that the NIH has invested in you. So when you go and apply, you know, it only looks good when then you go off to apply for other grants as well. So I encourage everyone to apply for this. And again, we're here for you if you have any questions, concerns, etc.
So then before we open it up for questions, I saw a couple people post in the chat. We will send out these slides, and then we will also be including a link for this recording for you to go back and look at some information as well. But are there other questions that you have for the panelists?
I can go through the questions if you'd like, Diana.
Oh, that would be great.
Perfect. Would one of the panelists or all of the panelists be able to speak to deciding between mentored versus independent research? I think Dr. Bilomek kind of covered this already. Dr. Liu or Dr. Aloa, do you have anything to add between mentored versus independent research for this award?
I mean, I think talking to the program officer would be really helpful. They could help you decide between the two. I don't know if there's any differences in like success rates versus, you know, mentored versus not, but it's just like one extra, you know, piece of the application versus another. But yeah, the program officer should be the best one, I think.
Dr. Aloa?
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, I think speaking, for me, for example, it really also, I think, depends on kind of which stage you are in your career. I think even now, yeah, so I think it's best to talk with your program officer about this. I would even say arguably that if you think it would be helpful to have, so even if you have like a KO8 but you don't have an R yet, if you have an R, it'd be kind of hard pressed to make the argument that you need to do mentored, need to have a mentored NIH LRP. But even if you are at the KO8 stage and you have your own lab, that is still a mentored grant. So if you think that you would personally benefit by having a co-mentor, then I would absolutely write the application in that way. You just want to do whatever's going to make you the best applicant and a higher likelihood to receive this grant. And so if you're still kind of in a mentored research role, you know, KO8, K23, I guess kind of a K99. I'll let Dr. Bilomek speak to that one, but then I think that maybe, or depending on where on that K99, but then maybe applying for a mentored. But I think speaking with a program officer would be the best thing to do.
Yeah, completely agree. I think those are the right parameters, and the program officer will get you there. Again, the mentored thing allows you to sort of take the benefit of your mentor's reputation in the field and as a mentor. So that's just a potential to add additional strengths. But yeah, if you already have like an R01, I just feel like, you know, it would be hard to make sense of that kind of an application. So unless you're really just transitioning into a different area or something. So yeah, project officer all the way.
And I think there's another question in the chat regarding other federal funds that aren't in the R series. And I think what I keep hearing from the panelists is it really is kind of it depends, and it depends very much on how independent the work you are doing and whether or not you feel like including a mentor into your application really would be beneficial. And so those are conversations that we can set up some time to discuss in more detail if you'd like, or like Dr. Bilomek had mentioned, the program officer would really be able to give you the best guidance on where that fits.
Great. Are there any other tips that the panel can offer for submitting renewal applications? Dr. Bilomek?
Yeah, I mean, I just think I think Dr. Liu's advice about just making it very easy to follow what your progress was. And like Dr. Loa said, that basically, even if you deviate from what your original aims were, just sort of indicating progress, make it, for just in general, grantsmanship's all about, just make it really easy for the reviewer to find evidence for the criteria that they're looking at, right? So for this, it's very clear, like, is there progress towards at least the early stages of independence as a researcher? And yeah, so I think kind of a chronological thing that we make a very clear thread of how you've grown and are on a positive trajectory towards independence that's the deal.
Great. Dr. Liu, any other tips for a renewal application?
No.
Dr. Aloa, any other tips for a renewal?
No, I think, no, not now.
And then in terms of some of the questions that are coming up as well, there's some questions about aligning research and the types of research that are available. So the LRP allows for clinical trials. I would put something that's too big on your application. Does anyone have any advice that they would give on clinical trials? Oh, it's not. So, but if you'd like to discuss more, we can set up some time to talk with maybe individuals who are more experienced with clinical trials to really give you the best advice for that. And then in terms of making a project fit, that's one of the complaints of the LRP is it has only 5 categories. And so sometimes you do need to get a little imaginative about where your research fits. So if you don't see a spot where you align with one of those 5 categories, let's set up a time to talk and we can kind of see what the best way is to fit into those categories. And really, I think it's going to look a lot like examining the categories, finding a way that you can fit in the right institute, and then reaching out to those program officers to ensure that there is alignment there.
The other thing I would say is they're funding you, right? So it's okay. Like, you know, we all have like a million ideas, and at the end of the day, you pick the one that you're able to craft a good grant from and make a story and pull it all together. But you're still going to do whatever research you do anyways. So, and that even goes to like, they're not just looking for basic, they're really looking for people invested in research and maintaining that career. And so that's why the other pieces of not just your research project, but you are just as important for this grant.
Great. And then I believe that's all of our questions. There was a question about who to contact for unique situations. I know Dr. Loa had volunteered to be reached out to in case anyone has a unique situation that they'd like to discuss. If anyone else has any type of question or something that they feel is very specific to their situation, feel free to send an email to myself and to Diana. We can help triage your question to the person who would best be able to answer it.
Yeah, so I think all 3 of us would be really happy to address questions, and I think Diana and Brooke could help point you to the right person once they know kind of what your situation is.
Exactly. Before we go, does anyone have any other last-minute questions that they wanted to ask our panel, or do our panelists have any final comments or words of wisdom they want to incite upon our guests?
I don't know, maybe you shouldn't do it. Like, I know you're probably busy. I'm just kidding, do it. Do it. You gotta do it. It's so good. All right, so again, just start soon and one step at a time.
Kim, any final words?
Yeah, I know that the NIH has a couple webinars on LRP, and so I think they might dig more into the details of things, so if you need that. And then the application package form, it's like 10 pages or whatever, that goes through everything in detail. So and you have to follow the rules, right? Like follow what they do and make it easy to read. But yeah, the webinars are helpful, and then the program officers and LRP liaisons, they're all over the place. So, you know, they increased from $35,000 to $50,000 per year last year. So that was they really are putting much more money into this. And I was told that they were still trying to fund around 50%. So I think that NIH is committed to getting more people into research.
And just to follow up with what Dr. Liu said, on our website where we are going to post this information, we also have the links to some of those other webinars as well. But if you have any issues finding something, let us know and we can help you get more details on how to put together your application. Dr. Ulloa, any?
No, just that start early. We're here to help you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions offline. And I look forward to talking with you soon on your application.
Yeah, UCI needs to get great at this. I mean, I just feel like we're going to be better as an institution if more of our faculty are receiving these things, and I'm really grateful to Diana and Brooke and ICTS for kind of just taking ownership of this. I think all of us were sort of operating in a vacuum to some degree when we did this before. So please, kind of take full advantage of that structure. And then what we learn from your experience is just going to pave the way for others. So if you're not someone that hates helping yourself, like a lot of us are, think of the good it'll do for the next, junior faculty to come through. So really thank you for even considering this. It's good for the institution as well.
All right, well, thank you all so much. We'll get all of the recordings and these slides out to everybody, and thank you for attending.